Yeah, I mean, it was a very hard time, because KK then one day came to me and said, look, I don't think I can work here anymore. It was just until then I was clueless that something like this is going to happen, right? So it was just, and he felt that I'd kind of become a bully. And I had not realized, and I was shocked when he said that. Obviously, your first response to it is defense, right? I mean, you just defend saying, no, that's not true. How can you say that? You also said this, all that stuff, right? Sab hoga, right? So, and then, luckily one of Venkat was on the board. Venkat is one of the founders of Daksh. And he was also our first angel and first board member. And he's still a board member, so he's really seen the company over the years. He sat me down and said, look, why don't you get a coach? You're 28. It's not like you have, how many 28-year-olds have 400-member teams and have built businesses? So get a coach.
My guest today is Aneesh Reddy, the co-founder and CEO of Capillary Technologies, a Bangalore-headquartered software as a service or SaaS company that's one of the global leaders in customer loyalty and engagement. What that means is that Capillary powers the customer loyalty operations of hundreds of companies around the world, from companies like Domino's, Puma, Shell, Marks and Spencer's, and the Tata Group to 15 of the world's top Fortune 100 companies. Each time you transact at one of these company stores or respond to a marketing message or upgrade your room, it's probably Capillary's tech at play behind the scenes. In its 16th year now, Aneesh tells me Capillary powers close to 7 billion annual transactions for its customers' customers. But, and there's always a but in great stories, Capillary and Aneesh didn't have an easy ride. They went through multiple economic downturns. They raised large venture rounds and expanded globally, only to shut down many of those operations after losing millions of dollars. Of the three co-founders, two left, one having burnt out and the other because Aneesh was too stressful to work with. Aneesh himself wanted to quit, but his board wouldn't have it. I'm sorry we couldn't release an episode last week. I was down with what started as a mild cold but became a moderate sinus infection, as you can probably still tell from my voice. It's not an excuse, as we should ideally have had a backup episode already recorded. I know. We're working to ensure this doesn't happen again. We never want to take your listenership for granted. Welcome to First Principles, Aneesh. I'm glad we're finally meeting, and I've been looking forward to meeting you.
Thanks for having me here, Rohin. Looking forward to it.
Great. So, just before we started recording, you were telling me about the time when you decided to start up. You told yourself that you'd give yourself 6 months to figure out if this startup thing works?
Yeah, I was
How did that work out for you?
I think, I was a 22, 23-year-old, right? And there's this urgency of doing everything very quickly at that age. And so I had...
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you because in our research, there's this exact same point came out. You come from a family of doctors.
Correct.
I think... You're the first one in your family who didn't decide to go and become a doctor, instead do an engineering. But one of the research things that came up with us was that your dad, I think, told you once after 10th or something that you were not cut out for being a doctor because you lacked patience.
Yep.
So that's the same exact thing that you started with.
Yeah, he sat me down in my 10th and said, look, you need a lot of patience to be a doctor. And I think... it was very nice of him, right? He didn't go the way of saying, look, my brother is a cardiologist now. He kind of started working at 35. And when he got his first real paycheck, right, I told him, I can retire now. I was 32 then. I was joking with him. I don't think I would have had the patience to last, that long, at least when I was a
That
22
was
year old.
fantastic advice from your dad then, right? Like,
Yeah,
because
terrific advice.
not many parents tell you about career choices from the point of view of patience.
Yep. No, I think that was one call that he definitely took right for me, and
So coming back to when you were 22, 23, and you'd spent what, 2 years at ITC in your first job?
yeah, it was about 2 years in. And ITC is a great place. You learn a lot. I joined through this management training thing. But I think the question of, what I'm doing and how does it impact the larger picture was missing, right? So, which is where there was this, and between KK and me, KK was my co-founder at Capillary, and maybe it started the cell. So there was the entrepreneurship cell back at IIT Kharagpur in our third year on campus. So there was this itch to do something on our own, right? And 2 years in, we both filed. He was at Microsoft Research, and his criminal life was he had this pyramid of patents that he had got, but nothing he wrote would ever get checked into like actual code, right?
Or product.
Or product, right? So both of us met and we said, yeah, I think it's time to, and we both were probably that generation which didn't need to send money back home. Like, unlike a lot of my friends who probably still needed to send some money back home and couldn't take the risks. For both of us, it was like, the opportunity cost of messing up 6 months or a year of your life was not really that much.
How do you come across that concept of 6 months, that it would take 6 months?
I think it was just very, back when we were in college, right? So there were many things that the two of us, or Anant, who also was at Capillary with me, had fixed in 6 months. So there was just this mental model of saying, give us 6 months and we will get it right. Right. So, and of course, when you're on campus, things are probably much smaller in scale. But it was that, I think. And it was also, of course, it was convincing my own parents.
Yeah, because you had a call from MIT to do your master's, which you declined before you went
Before I got into. So it
Right,
was a
so-
very unorthodox choice of choosing an ITC over an MIT call.
and then leaving ITC. So I'm guessing from your dad's parents' point of view, you essentially declined MIT to join ITC, and they kind of made peace with it. And then you're leaving ITC, which is a fairly well-known organization in India, to do something completely unknown by yourself, right? Like, did you
Yeah.
tell them what you're going to do?
Interestingly, it was 2008, right? Starting up wasn't cool at all, right? So I told them that, look, luckily for us, we went back to the same entrepreneurship cell and we got a 15 lakh seed loan to start, for which we gave IIT about 4% of the company. But I told them, look, we have enough money to start, right? So, and give us 6 months, we'll figure in 6 months that this is what we want to do. It's also very hard to explain to your doctor parents what do you do as a technology firm, right? It's a little bit of a I think back then we were trying to do this deals thing. It was called Deal Hunt,
Yes.
where essentially you would we were in Calcutta then. So on an SMS number, if you message saying you want to buy jeans, we'd send you
It
one
was
of those
group buying.
not group buying as
No?
much, but like which are the best offers that you can get.
Got it.
And some of those offers could also have been group offers, right? So it was really playing on that. But but of course, we do something very different now from that. Yeah.
So, all right. Coming back to Capillary, some of the larger organizations, among the many that you work with, Domino's, Tata Group, Puma, Shell, Marks and Spencer, would it be fair to say Capillary offers software products and services that help brands stay in touch with their customers and get those customers to spend more over their lifetime with them? Was that a fair way to describe Capillary?
Yeah, I think that's a fair way. I think
How would you describe it, like slightly more expansively?
over the years we've kind of narrowed down on what we do. I think we initially started off in the customer engagement type space. I think over the last 4-5 years we've realized that being the best in one thing is better than trying to do a few things, right? So we've kind of narrowed down on saying we'll do loyalty very well, right? So which is your membership, subscriptions, your hotel or airline miles programs, things like that. So I think today I'd say 90% plus of the business is very loyalty focused, and that focus has helped us as well because today we work with 15 of the Fortune 100. Although not everyone allows you to tell their names out. So some of those that you see there are folks who've given us permissions. So that focus has helped. So if you ask me, what we help do today is create loyalty between brands and consumers, right? So in one line, yeah.
One of the factoids that came up in our research was that your tech reaches over 1 billion customers and clocks over 5 billion transactions annually. What do these numbers mean? 1 billion customers and 5 billion transactions.
So a transaction is a consumer buying something in a store or online or booking a ticket or any of that, right? So so today the platform does about 5 billion plus transactions a year. It's a little bit more now. I think it's like 7 billion now. But so each transaction is basically one purchase, right? And we've grown over the years. So we have multiple customers who each have 100 million consumers on their platform, right? So together it's about 1 billion unique users, more or less across the world now, right? So yeah.
You said a while ago that it wasn't fashionable to start up in 2008. It was definitely not fashionable to start a SaaS business in 2008. Have you ever perhaps thought of the fact that, what would things have been like if you were not early? Because sometimes there is this thing of, are you a little early to the space? Have you ever thought about the fact whether you were early to the space?
I think we didn't start a SaaS business, right? So I think the way we started was we said, look, we started more like investors than like founders, to be honest. So we
Whose
said,
money were you investing and into what?
no, we were investing our time. But the idea was we didn't start off with this big business idea of what we wanted to do. We were just 2 years out of college. It was not like we had a lot of experience to say this is what we want to do. Right. So we said we started the investor way in the sense of picking two sunrise sectors and let's say do something in between them, and then as those sectors grow, you will grow with it, right? So, and as cliche as this sounds, we actually read a bunch of McKinsey reports, and it said India retail is happening, the mobile story is big, so we said let's do something between mobile and retail, right? So, and we kind of bounced into SaaS more than anything else because once we zeroed in on the sectors, we said let's speak to everyone we know in the retail space and in the mobile space and ask them, two kids from IIT, we can build good tech. Tell us what you want us to, right? So, and to our luck, the Lehman crash, the financial recession happened, and a lot of people we were speaking to would tell us that, look, our customers aren't coming back to stores. And my co-founder Krishna had this thing that until you really got someone to pay for it, he wouldn't write a line of code, right? Because he was brilliant at like the joke in campus used to be that he can code faster than you could type, right? So and he knew that if we just got him to start building stuff, then we would abuse that superpower of his, right? So we had to get someone to pay for it, and this was a recession, and the initial customers who we pitched to, trying to solve this customer engagement kind of a problem, would come back to us and say, look, we can't buy any big software from you. It's a recession. We can't buy servers. So can you, we have these marketing agencies who charge us monthly. Can you charge us monthly? And, this is fine with us. So that's how we kind of took space on AWS because they didn't want to buy servers. That's how we said, okay, we'll charge you a monthly per store model. So we really bounced into SaaS as a model, not till Rajan came on the board, which was probably 2010 or 2011. Rajan Anandan, Microsoft, Google, and Sequoia, right? So that we realized that, okay, there's a model for this. It's called SaaS. In fact, our first conversation with Rajan was saying, we want to change the name of the company from Capillary Technologies to Capillary Marketing Services. And he stared at us and he was like, "What's wrong with you guys? Marketing services companies trade at 1 times revenue. You guys are a technology firm." And then he sat us down and said, "No, no, no, no. This is stick to the name and just stick to what you're doing." Right. So yeah, so we bounced into SaaS really. We didn't start off saying this is a SaaS company. Yeah.
So just to be clear, you chose the space based on your research, not on any, personally felt or observed, lacuna or need.
Yeah, it was on research. In fact, our initial attempt was we spoke to, I don't know, like we didn't write a line of code for the first 6 months. We started August of 2008, a month before Lehman tanked. I think our first line of code was probably really only. I mean, we did try some random stuff out here and there, but on this product, our first line of code was only in like Jan Feb. And that was only after 3, 4, 5 customers told us that this is a problem for them. So the idea was again not to do, if someone told you that this is a problem for me, it's a unique problem to them, then you're building a services company. Right? So we spoke to like many people and figured, yeah, this seems to be a recurring problem for X number of people, and then said, let's build
Of course, with the benefit of hindsight, that's great. But back then, when you were starting out, you felt that 6 months is a good time to be able to validate the business that you're in. And then 6 months later, you haven't written probably a line of code, a few lines of code. But at that point, what were you feeling? Hey, 6 months is up and we haven't even started doing anything. Did you, I mean,
So I think it was very different, right? Because what happened was, so we started. In fact, the inception day for Capillary was probably January 19th of 2008. It was KK's birthday, and both of us got drunk, and then we were both cribbing about our respective jobs, which I think is very common. And then we zeroed in saying, I think we should do something now, right? So we had that 7-8 month lead time. So we did speak to a lot of people, read stuff, etc., right? So, but what happened was, look, our first customer was Indus League, which was part of Future Group. We knew our second customer was going to be Madura Garments because they kind of liked the problem that we were discussing. Our third was Indian Terrain. So although we didn't write a line of code, we were at a place where we knew, okay, look, if the largest in the market are saying this is a problem for them, then you probably, uncovered some stuff, right? And there was comfort in at least my head that KK could code anything up in 2-3 days. Our first version of the product really came out in like 2 or 3 days. It was between him and a bunch of interns we had at IIT Kharagpur. And we had hired some of these interns from, Dhirubhai Ambani, DIICT has the 6 months internship program. So we had got a couple of them over. And yeah, the first version of the product was out in like 3 days. So
great. How does Capillary make money?
So we it's a software as a service model. We charge customers for running their loyalty platform for them. That's 90% plus of our business. Probably just stick to that. It's a usage-based model. So you charge for every 100,000 consumers you have on the platform. It's an annual recurring fee. We've narrowed down the business over the last 3, 4, 5 years in terms of scope. But the good piece is, I think we have 60 customers who pay us approximately $1 million each, and the rest is more like a long tail. So it's a significantly large enterprise focus play, like best of brands, a Shell or a Tata or a Nestle. So that's the business model, right? So it's mostly a fixed fee plus as you breach the slabs, you pay us more.
Great.
So yeah.
All right. You're in your 16th year this year as a company. How many employees are there at Capillary?
I think we are about 700 full time and another couple of hundred on contract, right? So that's
and do you disclose your revenue?
I mean, like.
Is there a
we filed to be a public company.
Yes, in 2021 December.
Right. So if you go onto our website, we actually stuck with that. So our last annual report is also on our website, which is the 23.
So then you can definitely quote from that.
Yeah,
if
but
it's
we've
public.
grown significantly since, right? So
what was the number in the last report?
we were at about 39 million.
All right.
For the
But you
last
just
FI.
said 60 customers pay you $1 million each, so that
Yeah,
itself
we've
translates to 60.
significantly grown
All
since
right.
then. So
All right. And how much venture funding have you raised till date?
that's another story altogether. So we've raised a lot of money. About 110 million has gone into building the business, right? So that's primary. That's gone into. Thankfully, a lot of that is still in the bank. But we've also done a lot of secondaries, right? So thankfully, there's been a lot of interest in the stock. So we've also had about 170, 180 million of secondaries.
Got it.
So
And what was your last valuation? Is that something that you disclose?
let's keep that private
All
for
right.
now. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for listening to First Principles. I am Anushka and I produced this episode that you're listening to. My colleague Rajiv, a resident sound engineer, put it together. I just need a minute of your time. So, I am a podcast producer at the Ken, but one of the things on my weekly roster is actually completely non podcast related. I help put together the First Principles newsletter as well. Now, if you haven't already subscribed to it, it's a free weekly newsletter from the Ken. And you're listening to the First Principles podcast. So I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that the First Principles newsletter is for you. Because every Sunday, it drops into your inbox with one mental model that applies the First Principles lens to your work and life. For instance, in our last edition of the newsletter, we spoke about the significance of occasionally thinking about longer term, let's say 10 to 20-year journeys. Why modern life and professional settings often force us to think and plan in the short term, but how that prevents us from course correcting our longer career and life arcs. Also, you get book recommendations, wonderful photographs, interesting links, and even music recommendations. And all of these are from the First Principles community. There's a link in the show notes that leads you straight to this edition. Also, by the way, I edit the book section of the newsletter. And I'm just going to take this opportunity to say that if you have any book recommendations, any favorites that you think the First Principles community, folks like you, would love, please send them to me. You'll find a link in the show notes for that as well. Thank you. Back to Rohin now.
How many co-founders? You started with 2 co-founders?
KK and I started back then. Our first, and KK was brilliant at tech. I'm a half decent sales guy, right? So and we really needed someone who was really very good at ops, right, running the place type stuff. So at that point in time, Anant, who's now my co-founder and has been with us for a better half of 13, 14 years, right? So we asked him that, look, will you join us? And the starting up in India was not cool, then played. And he was a PNG, nice job, great company. He said, look, not right now, right? So Ajay joined us instead. Ajay and Anant were extremely close friends. And Ajay said, look, I'll do it, right? So Ajay joined another founder. Then, of course, both KK and Ajay moved on in 2013, 14, 6-7 years into the firm. And I've been very lucky to have good folks stay with me for a very long time, right? So today in Capillary, I have Anand and Sridhar as co-founders. Both of them joined us in 2010. And although, I've been told many times that being a founder is a lonely journey and some of that stuff. Thankfully, I've been blessed to have great people around me, right? So we've had, we'll probably sometime this year hit 100 people spending more than 10 years with us.
No,
So,
that's fantastic. Congratulations.
So
100 out of 700 is not something to be scoffed at.
I mean, of the 100, probably 60 still are with us. 40 might have spent 10 and then moved on. But it's still a large number of folks who... so I feel, the company has had many founders, right? So it's, I just happen to be the guy who started it, but...
That's very philosophical. We'll cover some of this in the later part of our conversations. We talked about the IPO. You'd filed for an IPO in December 2021. Yet last year, obviously you haven't IPO'd yet. And last year you raised, $45 million funding round as well. So are you still doing your IPO?
I think sometime in, we started in 2008, right? When the unicorns and the $1 billion were not what inspired founders, right? I think what inspired us was this chat we had with Arjun Malhotra, who was one of the founders at HCL, and he had come to give the first talk for the ESL. You know, it was when we met the guy, we were like, you know, aisa kuch karna hai life mein, right? So what inspired us was companies like Infi, a HCL, a Wipro.
Large multinational organizations writing software.
I think people-driven companies which had good culture, right? So, and Infi, of course, was the bellwether, whatever you want to call it, right? So, and Infi, in that sense, has also spawned a whole set of smaller public companies which went on services, etc. Right? So there was this ambition, I think, in ours is Girish puts this very well. Girish of Freshworks, that you dream in installments. So ours is also, I think, a story of dreaming in installments. Sometime in 2012, 13, or 10, sometime in that time frame, we said, look, we want to build a company like Infi. Something which is products from India. Because one thing we did face when we were in the early years was people would just tell us, look, you can't build a product company out of India, right? And we were on top of that selling to India also, right? So they were like, dead on arrival was typically how people
building from India and selling
to India or Asia, right? So I think we had heard so many no's, and still the company was doing quite well. That there was somewhere this arrogance or this thing in the head ki, you have to build a public SaaS company out of India selling to Asia, right? So we will definitely go public. I think it's part of. It's part of building a.
It's one of your dream installments.
Yeah, it's one of the dream installments, not only for me but for many people in the company, right? So, but I think of course, last year, I think we filed and then the markets just tanked after that. Thankfully for us, the business was doing well, so we were able to raise a Series D, 45 million. We haven't disclosed, but there's another 95 million of secondaries that's happened after that. So significant large round through last year. So there isn't as much urgency to go public. We in fact ran our roadshows as well. Unlike a lot of folks who just filed and didn't, we were at an EBITDA break even, so people felt that you might still be able to list in a bad market. So we did spend 3-4 months. We met like 50 investors, US, India, Singapore. And I think it was good to understand where they come from, right? So we definitely list, but I think what we realize is, I think listing when you're at probably 10% free cash, I think means the stock is going to be a lot more stable. And so I think the goal for us is that let's get to a 10% free cash in the business. Along with, of course, a rule of 40 and some of that also playing.
What's the rule of 40?
In a SaaS business, globally, you look at growth and free cash, right? So if growth plus free cash is more than 40, you typically tend to be in the top 5% of companies in your space, right? So, I mean, it's a fairly used dictum for most software companies, growth plus free cash.
All right. You mentioned an interesting concept, which you attributed to Girish, is dreaming in installments. How would you look back at the last 15 years of Capillary and possibly break it up into, let's say, 3 or 4 or 5 installments that you dreamt of? Or like, I'm essentially trying to get you to trace back the evolution of Capillary into maybe 3 or 4 or 5 steps, major steps to where it is today. What would that be? What were those installments?
That's a good question. Let me do 3 installments.
All right.
Right. So the first installment, I think, was the first 5 years, right? Which was really 8 to 12 or 8 to 13, where I think we started up and we zeroed in on this problem. So we knew our customers loved that problem, that if we solved it, we would make money. But everyone else felt this was a bad problem to solve because we were building software for India. And we were building software products in India, right? So we didn't have the love of VCs initially, at least, right? Our first venture funding only happened in 2012. And so everyone we went to would tell us the same thing, that India doesn't pay for software, right? So in fact, the number of VCs who tried to convert us to being a consumer company, because we would have all this customer data with us, right? So was not small, right? So the first 5 years was really just going out and proving that you could do this. It was amazing because because we were solving a real problem, we had insane momentum in terms of customer success, right? So we went from 0 to 1,000 stores in the first 18 months. I think we got to 5,000 stores in.
So when you say stores, you mean like the POS machines on those stores are running Capillary software.
Correct. We initially started with retail, although today retail is only half our business. So I think we were amongst the earliest to get to 1 million in ARR, 2 million in ARR. It was crazy. You were growing at like a unbelievable pace. I would probably be taking, I don't know, like for the first 4 years of Capillary, I actually didn't pay rent anywhere. Because I would be traveling so much, and we were just 2 years out of college, so I would just go crash at IIT friends' houses. And so it was like that, right? It was just crazy. We were just growing. So the first 5 years was just that, right? So I think building out the business, saying you can actually build something like this. And then when we opened Singapore and the Middle East, is when people then realized that, I think this is real.
So that's the next
I think around 2012, 13 probably is when we ended up raising till then we were a very frugal, we'd got to 2 million of ARR with about $1 million raised between 17 different angels. So it was your
cap table was interesting.
That was fine. They were great people. So I think folks like Rajan, Harminder, Venkat, they've stayed along. They haven't sold even after 15 years. Many of them doubled down in COVID when the company was going through a bad phase. It was great angels in that sense. So the first 5 years was that, right? And then in 2012, we opened Singapore, Malaysia, and I think Dubai. That's when we started getting a lot of VC interest. I think then folks by then realized that, look, this is not just an India problem they're solving. And luckily for us, the way we expanded out was also our customers in India taking us to these markets outside. A Puma, Pizza Hut, saying, look, the same problem works for us even in Singapore. Can you solve it for there? Right. So, and once we did that, I think the massive Series A, we raised about 16 million, 4 million in secondaries, 12 in primaries. This was 2012. And I think the next 5 years, I would say, were really
which, if I'm not mistaken, was one of the largest or the largest Series A
in that
for them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And there was just so much competition between the investors that we didn't know we could taking a secondary as a founder back then was like criminal. I don't know if you remember. We suddenly had both of them sitting down and saying, why don't you take some money on the table? Right. So it was funny. We did a $4.5 million secondary. Each of us took $500,000 out, which was a lot of money back then. And we created a $1 million ESOP pool for employees to sell. And then we also got all our angels and exit. At least half, a third of whatever they had invested was out. A lot of money, right? So we were at this point in time, we were burning 5 lakhs a month as a business. I still remember the numbers. We were burning 5 lakhs a month. The business was doing 1.3 crores a month in revenues. And I think we were at this interesting crossover of saying, do we switch over to being profitable or do we raise money?
Burn more, grow more.
And I think, it was great VCs as well, right? Sequoia and Norwest. And we obviously chose this side. I think the next 5 years, I think, are really from, I'd say, 13 to 18, were really the very confused years of Capillary. I think we had a lot of money.
The excesses as well.
Yeah. I think the excesses as well. Right. So it was, both of us were 27, 28. Till then, we were really a business that was built on constraints. Right. So, and we would be extremely coordinated as the team and all that stuff. But once you see so much money, I think we spread really too thin. We went from, I think, just doing, we had, in India was a good business. We had Singapore where we had about 10% of our revenue was coming from Singapore. And then we had one guy in Dubai. Right. So from there, over the next 12, 18 months, we opened offices in Australia, Hong Kong, South Africa, UK, US. And it was still the same talent pool, right? So you really stretched people, you moved people everywhere, you broke everyone. Right? It was a mess, right? So once you've raised money, and you have a certain valuation, now you also have this unfortunate pressure of having to grow it and all that
justify
stuff,
it
right?
and
To
yeah.
justify it, grow it, etc. And the fact is, look, I think in hindsight, I think what people told us that you can't build a large SaaS business out of India is true, right? So it's just that we didn't see it then. Getting to a 20 million, I think, is easy in an Asia business. Getting to 100 is going to be very hard. It's just the nature of the market and stuff, right? So we weren't built for that kind of growth as well. So you really needed to reinvent the company, which we didn't realize all the way till 2018-19. That, I think what got you here is definitely not going to get you to where you want to go, right? So those I'd say 13 to 18 were really years which were we did a lot of stuff. We opened a lot of markets. We then shut a lot of markets. Then we said, okay, let's just do Asia. We were at that point we were still slightly large enterprise focused, right? Madhura, the future groups and stuff. Then said, let's do SMB and mid market. We said, if it's going to be Asia, then you need multiple products, to build a large company. So we went and bought an e-commerce platform play. E-commerce was going through the roof at that point in time, if you remember. So the company called Marjack, bad buy, right? So mistakes, so it was just, it wasn't a great product. The product wasn't good. And in a product business...
No, so I hear you, Anish. I'm sorry to interrupt. All of this, you said, traced back to raising a large round, doing the secondary, and suddenly the constraints are gone. Right? The world is your oyster. And like, I see multiple threads running here. One is, of course, the constraints are gone. Second, you've got this great valuation, which most people think is the reward, but actually it's the other way around. Valuations is something which is a reward for something which you're supposed to achieve in the future. So in many ways, it puts you on a much different path. So constraints are gone. At the same time, you need to justify these significant valuations. And of course, you're all, 27-year-olds, 28-year-olds with $500,000 in the bank. And let's do it, right? So what would you do differently today in that phase? Is there anything you could have done differently, really? Or was it just a natural evolution that you perhaps needed to go through in order to really realize what you guys were good at?
I think hindsight is 2020, right? So I think I definitely do things differently. We have a lot of money in the bank right now, but we aren't making those mistakes again. I think what constrains, capital is of course a constraint, but it's also talent, which we kind of didn't realize at that point in time, right? So also, some of these dictums which people, I think now are very inherent. We'd raised money at 14 times revenue back then, and it was really start of the boom cycle in some senses. 14 times revenue is unheard of stuff. Even in SaaS, it's like was very rare to come by back then. Of course, 2021 is like a joke when you talk about that. But I think a few things, right? So one is just given that you have money doesn't mean you go do everything that's an opportunity out there. And so we now very strictly sit down and say, look, you put a size of price for everything. You then measure it down saying, we worked with X to 10X in 2020 and then realized that this is the right way to think of what you want to build. Rather than if there's an opportunity, you just go out and do it, right? Which, we opened all these tiny markets, which could never be more than 3, 4, 5 million ever for you, right? Like Hong Kong or some of those, right? So the second thing I would say is, I think although you have the opportunity to raise money at like crazy valuations, I think let's not do that, right? So the fact of life is, beyond the first 100 crores of money in life, 100 also, I think 30 or 20 crores is probably the number. That money is not going to significantly change the quality of your life, right? So all this this paper valuation you have, or this, it's really not going to like improve the quality of your life, and I think it can definitely screw your happiness as well.
And
Right?
what
So
and what was your third? I think this was your second dream installment. So what happened after this? After the excesses till what, 2013
from 2013
to
to 18 was all of
2018?
this,
Yeah.
right? So we were still growing, right? So we opened a lot of markets. The core was doing very well, right? India, Southeast Asia, and Middle East, that core was doing well. So although we had opened many markets and we went from burning 5 lakhs a month to burning, $12 million in the next 18 months, we were suddenly at this place where we were burning $1.5 million a month. But the business had also scaled to had tripled in that 18-24 months. So you were still a good company, right? So you still ended up raising another 13, 14, 15 million at that point in time. By then, of course, KK and Ajay had decided to move on. So so it was, I think that was the first time that reality hit me a little bit, saying, look, I think you've messed up a bit over the last.
We'll come back to this. That was a stressful period for you and for Capillary as well.
Yeah, and then we raised another 45 from Warburg, right? This was 2015, right? And Warburg was willing to bet on this multi-product story from India, for India, right? So it was largely, they funded the acquisition of Marjack. And then we also did this thing of saying, if you can't win in the US, let's win in China. Because genuinely told, those are the two, I would say
Massive
large markets, right? Large single language, contiguous type markets, right? So we opened China. We bought an e-commerce company. We also wanted to do SMB. So this was 2015, 16. We had not learned our lesson of doing too many things by then. I think the next 3-4 years was we blew up all the money we raised. I think it was 2018, 19. We got to about 30 million-ish in revenues, 29 to be exact. Growth had stalled. We were growing at like 20% year on year. It was a very broken business. Right? There was a loyalty side. There was a campaigns business. There was a e-commerce business. There was SMB. There was China. It was just spread. When you're having so many things, it's just very hard to get so many things to move at the same pace, right?
Or to focus on what to exactly grow.
And we also then got in some talent from the outside. We're lucky to have had good talent coming from the outside all through, right? But we were again back to burning 2 million, right? So back to burning 2 million a month. This time, I think, it was just, when you're growing at 20%, no one's going to give you a lot of money, right? So you had to get your act together. So 2019 to now, I think is really the third phase where we had to sit down and say, look, I think, okay, we built this somehow, but let's figure what's it going to take to get to really being a sustainable, public, large company, right? So that meant a lot of redoing what we did, right? We I'd say from 30, we shut a lot of businesses. We shut our commerce business. We shut China. We shut mid-market. So from 30, I think we came down to about 17, 18 million. And then from there, we've grown about 4 times now. Right? So that's been the last...
So the maturing of Capillary. I mean, I see the analogy to perhaps a human being, you were born, the initial years were the toddler years where you were trying to figure out, and then you had the teenage and the youth where you guys went all the excesses and the partying and all of that, and still didn't learn your lessons in your early 20s, and then towards your mid 20s to end 20s or maybe 30s, you're like, look guys, we need to settle down, and you've got your act together.
Yeah.
Fantastic stuff. You said, and you're absolutely right that SaaS businesses from India weren't popular. In fact, many of the SaaS businesses, and I think you've said this in the past as well, where the kind of SaaS business that were there in India, whether it's Zoho or Freshworks, etc., operated on a lower cost of ownership or a transaction size. And But something's changed, of course, right? There's folks like you, there's Amagi, there's Browser Stack, etc. And you said that, like, you've got 60 plus companies paying you $1 million each. So that $1 million single client barrier seems to have been breached now, which is one of the things people didn't think could happen from India, right? You're building a SaaS product from India. Sure, you can operate at the lower to mid lower end of the market, SMB space, etc. But nobody's going to pay you $1 million. What changed? What caused this?
I think a few things, right? So I think I would say, look, most of the money in software has been made in the large enterprise space. I mean, it's out there to be. Like if you look at most of the large software companies have all built with money from large customers, right? So, and I think a lot of us realized that a little late, probably. What's also changed is, I think if you're selling to large enterprises, the thing that really is important is risk. For a large enterprise, whether they pay you $1 million or $1.5 million, doesn't really matter to them, right? This is a $5 billion plus revenue play. I think what matters to them is if you got in and then you mess something up, right? So risk ends up becoming a very large part of what's happened over the last 3, 4, 5 years, if you ask me, is all of us have figured a way of getting one large enterprise customer or two large enterprise customers in some way, and then getting into a Forrester. So cutting that risk element down. So earlier, if like there's this, when we opened UK in 2012, right? There's this event called Retail Week, and events were about half our lead funnel, right? I would go pick cards, call them up the next day, and I was at this. Retail Week thing, standing at the edge of the stage. So when the guy walks down from after giving his talk or panel, I would pick cards from them and then call them next day, right? So I go to this guy and this guy looks at me and says, I say I'm from Bangalore. Without even hearing the rest, he says, look, sorry, we don't outsource services to India. And he walks away, right? So compared to now, right, when a lot of these folks are probably using an Indian software product somewhere, know that this works really well, right? And is probably better implemented than your US counterpart, because we can implement better. That's anyway the core part of like the services DNA in India is about implementation.
It's probably leaner because it's younger code, nimbler code.
Exactly.
As opposed, yeah.
Like, cutting edge. Then all your analysts also say that now, right? So if you look at a Forrester or a Gartner, a lot of the waves or the quadrants are headed by Indian companies now. Like the loyalty wave is headed by us. Whatfix heads the digital adoption wave. Many examples I can give you, right? So what's happened is, I think for that CIO or for that CMO sitting there, they know that there is a newer breed of better,
now.
easier to use, newer generation software, far more flexible, both people-wise and contract-wise, than US companies would be. So yeah.
So this entire thing of Gartner and Forrester, this reminds me of this. There used to be this adage, right? When in the heydays of IBM, there used to be this adage called "You never get fired for choosing IBM."
Absolutely.
This just sounds like another version of that. You never get fired for choosing someone who's in a Gartner quadrant or on a Forrester chart.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, the way it works is, we got into till 2021, we would not pay Forrester or Gartner $1. We were like, look, why would you pay anyone, right? So in 2020, we got an advisor in the US when we were thinking of opening the US business. And he said, look, nothing doing. I mean, like, if you really want to build a business here, you'll have to put some money here. We said, okay, $50,000, 6 months or something. We said, okay, let's sign up for part-time with Forrester, right? So, and we ended up being a leader on the wave earlier this year. And it took our pipelines up by 6-7 times. Incredible. Because what happens is, if you're a large enterprise procurement team or a CXO, and you want to do something new or you want to change something that you're doing today, you're going to call up a Forrester guy or you're going to download that wave report and say, send it to the top 5 folks. So if you're not in that consideration of the top 5, however good your product is, you're not even going to get a seat at the table, right? So I think that's changing. In fact, which is where I'm personally very excited about software products and SaaS from India, because I think we've finally got into large enterprise now. till now it was largely an SMB play, right? Which is traditionally not been where most of the dollars have been made, right? So I think that large enterprise thing is happening now, right? So yeah.
All right. I want to switch to, I think, the time during your excess years where you lost both of your two co-founders. What happened? I mean, I'm sure it must have been a stressful time for you as well. And take us through that.
I mean, I think we spread ourselves extremely thin, right? So I think what happened is KK had moved to the US. I was looking at Southeast Asia and Middle East. Ajay was running India, and until then we would actually all stay in the same house till that point in time, till 2012. It was a house in BTM, and it was 2 minutes walk to another bungalow, which was our office, right? So
Were you all unmarried?
yeah. We were all I think we all got married in quick succession of like 2 months, right? So, and yeah, so we raised a lot of money. We got married. We had this nice secondary. So each of us also had now bought big cars, nice houses, all that stuff. And given you had money for the first time, there was also there was always ambition, but there was also now money to support that ambition, right? So KK moved to the US. He always wanted to move to the Valley. So he moved there. And suddenly what was a very coordinated team, I think kind of broke into this, and if you're in the Valley and if you have a co-founder in the Valley, God bless you. Because, it's exactly 12 hours away. The East Coast, I think, is still so much better because you get an extra 3-hour coverage. But otherwise, one of you is going to be groggy on that call very late in the night. Right? So I think, there was also this part in me where I think the money had got to both our heads in a lot of senses. Until then, we were this company where, the best, whoever had the best idea would win, right? So it was very merit than saying, is Aneesh saying it, or is KK saying it, or is someone else saying it, right? So, but I think with that money also came this pride of saying, we know what we're doing, right? To an extent. And I think, and the company scaled like crazy. We were about 100 people probably, 100, something on that. We scaled to 400 in about 18 months, right? So you just went berserk. You hired people from everywhere, good people. What also happens is, I think when you're hiring senior folks, right, if you don't really assimilate them well, they will naturally build a silo. And that's what ended up happening in the company, right? So we had these 5-6 big silos: engineering, professional services, HR, etc., etc. And we had 3 co-founders who were all in different parts of the world. Right. So as a net result, I don't think I think even my behavior would then end up being taking rash calls, like saying, look, we don't have the time to do this. Right. So very bully-like behavior. Right. So I think KK, at least half of it he left for the fact that I think I was not workable with him at that point in time. Ajay, I think, was a different story. Ajay burnt out. Right. It's very hard to build a business in India. Right. And he was the guy who was shouldering it at that point in time. And he had taken all the load onto himself and let KK and me move out to greener pastures. Right. So I think he just kind of...
Were you still based out of India when you were looking at
I was based out of Bangalore. I mean, I think I'd moved to Singapore for a year. I couldn't fully finish the move. I'd got an EP and then had moved, but then we decided to come back. Right. So that meant, I mean, it was a very hard time, because KK then one day came to me and said, look, I don't think I can work here anymore. It was just until then I was clueless that something like this is going to happen. Right. So it was just, and he felt that I'd kind of become a bully. And I had not realized, and I was shocked when he said that. Obviously your first response to it is defense, right? I mean, you just defend saying, no, that's not true. How can you say that? You also said this, all that stuff, right? Oh, sab hoga, right? So, and then, luckily one of Venkat was on the board. Venkat is one of the founders of Daksh. And he was also our first angel and first board member. And he's still a board member, so he's really seen the company over the years. He sat me down and said, look, why don't you get a coach? You're 28. It's not like you have, I mean, how many 28-year-olds have 400-member teams and have built businesses? So get a coach.
Sorry, I'm going to stop you here because we'll get into this later in the second part of the conversation. But from here, I wanted to ask you, while we're still talking about like work and culture, etc. and stuff like that, I read somewhere that roughly a third of the people at Capillary are those who've left and come back. Is
Yeah.
that true? I mean, that's an amazing statistic.
Yeah,
How
we
did
have
you
a lot
manage
of folks
that?
who go and come back.
How do you manage that? How do you consciously manage that? Do you have an official program that encourages, or is this just serendipitous people
It's
applying?
serendipitous. We've never done, I mean, other than one or two roles where, I mean, there's no program. There might be one or two roles where you are looking for someone and then you might just call up someone from the past and say, look, this role is available.
No,
But it's
okay.
not like there
so
is
you do have a thing. I mean, the reason I ask is, especially in startups that have gone through extremely stressful growth phases and stuff like that, often when people leave, it's doors that are shut forever, right? But the fact that they're coming back means those doors weren't shut forever. So, and I mean, roughly a third of your people coming back means they left and are either coming back on their own or you're calling them back, which is actually very rare. So, which is why I was asking you, is it conscious? Like, how do you do it? How did you get to it? Did you just get to it without aiming for it?
I think most of it was serendipity. A lot of it, uh, I think it was till 2020, right? Till before COVID, our annual attrition was 5%. 5% annual attrition, right? In Bangalore, I think you can have companies which have 5% monthly attrition, right? So I think it was always, and
Which
the way,
would be an understatement, actually. That's
sorry?
5% monthly attrition also would be an understatement for many companies. Yeah.
So I think what happened with us was, we were, it was kind of like we built out of a college dorm in some senses, so the culture was always very strong, right? And luckily for us, we started in a recession, so we got some great people to join us initially at reasonable costs. And they grew up into being great leaders as well, right? So your work in Capillary was generally good. The culture was decent, other than probably that 2013 type time frame. And so the reason most people left were one of two, right? Was either you burnt out, and there's something we realized in 2013-14 that burnout is real, right? Like I told you, Ajay burnt out. Piyush was who used to head engineering for us. He burnt out, and so we had this program where every 4 years you get a month off, right? It's like a sabbatical, fully paid. Go, so we did put in some of those places to make people not burn out. We very consciously we force people to take holidays in the firm, right? So you will definitely have at least 3-4 times a year mails going out saying you have to finish your quota of holidays right now, right? So things like that. And in general, that meant people knew that that this is a place where you'll be treated well, which unfortunately hasn't been the case with most startups in India, right? I mean, it's just been very messy in that sense. The second reason was salaries. We've always had, we are not the best paymasters in the market. We've always had this philosophy of saying we'll keep it at 70% of the market. Because our belief has been that good culture and good work would mean you will need to get a 50-60% hike to jump. Now that really happened in COVID, right? So which is why even we came to the 30% attrition in the years of COVID. But a lot of these folks go out and realize that, look, money is not everything in life, right? It's not like we were paying them less or they couldn't have a good quality of life. So we had many people who have come back, saying, look, I think forget the money. I like the place, so I'll be back, right? So it's these two reasons why people leave, right? So
bringing employees back is tricky, especially just sticking with the salary bit, because especially people who've gone for a higher salary, the expectation is that most of us hate to get like a salary cut in our careers, right? But you're saying many people have been all right taking a salary cut to come back because the quality of work and the culture matters as well?
I wouldn't say a salary cut, but when you come back a year and a half or 2 years later, you're not
Got it.
asking
It's
for a hike.
equalized. Got it.
You're not asking for a hike. So let's say you went out at 30,
Got it.
you would have probably got of 10, 15 each year here.
Right.
You come back, you're pretty much at similar levels, right? The expectation then is not that you give me another 30 on top. Right?
I got it.
Yeah. But yeah, taking a salary cut and all is
Yeah.
is very hard. Right. So
Yeah, because in my experience, I think that.
but you're seeing
even
some of
if-
that now, by the way.
Oh, I mean, that's desperation.
Yeah.
Right?
I think it's desperation, and I also think I think people also now somewhere have internalized that, if I got a 50-60% hike in 2020,
It was not sustainable.
2021, then it was not real.
That's true. That's true. So your attrition ranged from 5% in your best days to what, 30% in your worst days?
Yeah,
Now it's
21, 22 was at 30, which was unbelievable. Because, I mean, this 30, we know that, we do a lot of exit interviews to figure, all that stuff, right? So we knew that if...
Do exit interviews, what's your secret to making exit interviews work? Because they're one of the hardest things to get, because people who are leaving an organization are not exactly sure whether they should be telling the truth while leaving, or what is the incentive to tell the truth. And similarly, the people who are interviewing them during the exit interview are not exactly incentivized to always capture the real truth and transmit it back within the organization. What's your secret for making great exit interviews?
I think, look, I do believe that HR is to be run by the founders or the team more than just HR, right? So usually a lot of our exit interviews happen after the employee has left and not before, right? And they're usually a month or two or three where I or someone, who's really worked closely in the leadership would go take the person out for a drink. And the idea there is also to ask them the questions of, what are you liking about the other company? Right? Also to understand, are there processes in the other company which we can implement here? Right? So it's not just a...
So the intention is truly to figure out, because you've given time for them to settle down, for them to be able to spot the differences, etc. And as opposed to most exit interviews where it's a checklist process.
Correct. And it's very non-agenda. You're taking a friend out for drinks after 3 months. Right?
So this is exactly, like I asked you earlier, are you consciously doing things that make people want to come back to the organization? I would assume this is one of those things. Because if you left an organization and 3 months later the founder or someone senior took you out for
I
a
don't
coffee.
think it's not like HR is chasing me up saying, take this guy out.
No, but I'm saying that
so-
it helps.
No, it
Because
helps. But I think I'm saying it's part of the DNA. It's not a checklist.
Of course. I was not implying that it's by conscious. I did not mean checklist. In fact, if anything, it's the opposite of a checklist, because most often checklist processes are not conscious processes. They're just checklist processes.
Right.
But this is very interesting. Let me switch to a slightly different question about careers. Given all the ups and downs in your own career as an entrepreneur and leader, what is your advice to people on finding careers and succeeding at them? And it's a very broad question, but still.
I think it's actually a very relevant question. I've had many people call me up, good friends in the last 6 months to a year, saying, look, I'm in this job. I'm not very kicked or happy about it, but it pays really well. Right? So, I think on careers, at least this is the way I've always thought about it, is, you don't need a lot of money to be happy in life. Right? And there is never enough money to satisfy all your greeds. Your greeds is just a greed after the greed after the greed, right? It's never going to be enough. And I hence feel, that build your career around happiness, build your career around what gives you, what makes you happy and what keeps you happy. Like if your day-to-day role, which is probably 12 hours of your day or 10 hours of your day, if you're not happy about what you're doing there and just living for a comp or something, I don't think it's going to leave you happy eventually. And thankfully, we're all in a stage today where any job you take, you will get enough money to live a happy life, right? So career advice from me is very simple: do what keeps you happy, right?
And I mean that's simultaneously very sensible, but also very hard to implement, right? Do what keeps you happy. What is that like? Is there, could you go one level deeper into what does that mean? Because those people who called you up, your friends, I'm assuming, typical midlife, this thing, right? You've essentially reached a level where it's the version of golden handcuffs, right? You can't like, so you have to pick between this significant amount of money that you're making versus something else which you call happiness. But I'm saying that's harder, it's abstract, it's not. So at that stage, what is happiness?
So let's put it this way, right? I think if you're spending 12 hours of your day working, if you're not happy in your work, hard to be happy elsewhere. Right?
That's true.
And what makes you happy at work? Let's answer this question, right? So I think it's largely two things, right? So one is quality of work, that you know that it is good, intellectually stimulating work. For some, it might be, I mean, depending on who you are, for some, it might be you're learning something, right? I mean, there are people who are always stuck with this thing saying, if I'm learning, then I'm. There are other people for whom it's just, are you managing enough? Some of that. But I'm not saying either is right or wrong, but quality of work is the first one. The second is quality of people around you, right? So are you having to, in a job, constantly look for your bag? Is it an organization where there's I mean, you might be great at politics, but who wants to do politics, right? I mean, like, it's just that, right? So I feel these two, right? So if you're 6 months into and today, for every startup, you call 5 people up, you will know what the culture in that place is, political, apolitical, what is it? You get to know, right? So at least my advice to a lot of folks has been that, look, it's okay if you're getting a 20% lower salary somewhere or a 30% lower salary somewhere else, which is enough to maintain your lifestyle, then go for it, yeah. I mean, you'll be happier there. It seems like you like the people, you like the culture in that place a lot more than this other place where they're trying to, it's a burning train. They're like trying to hire
Right.
people at expensive numbers, right? So, yeah.
What do you add most value to Capillary as CEO?
That's a good question. I think what do I help things around here. So it's not like, I think I'm generally the guy who gets pulled in when something is breaking. So I help things around mostly. So it's not like,
Okay. I mean, say it's not you, someone else. Like, why couldn't they help around? Why is it that you as Aneesh are able to do this most effectively?
that's a good question. So I don't know. I think by help things around, I mean, let me think through this a little bit. Can others help? For sure, yes. Right. So I do think, in general, I've been regarded in Capillary as this guy you can go to anytime. We're a very flat org. And when people open up and ask that they're struggling with this, they're struggling with that, I think it's easier as a founder to make a couple of calls and debottleneck something for people. Not that it happens all the time, but I've seen sometimes some of that work.
All right.
So,
I'll flip this question round, right? Say I took away Aneesh from Capillary. What would Capillary miss the most?
that's a good question. I think it'll miss, the culture will be hit a little bit for sure. Right. So I think we've traditionally been, even in our worst times when we really had like no money in the bank, I think our culture has been a culture of care. Right. So in COVID, when we had no option but to cut, the joke going around in the company was people who are leaving are being taken care of better than people who are staying. So I actually, in all hindsight, yes, that is the case. But so I think that part will go, right. I think the part of the culture of care, I think, will miss a little bit. The second is, of course, this. I think I think this drive to we've taken some fairly long-term calls, especially on technology, etc., uh, which you wouldn't take if you were trying to build just a profitable machine, right? So I think some of those would miss. But other than that, I think it'll be a great company. I every time I go on a Vipassana break for 10 days or whatever, I think when I come back, the company is running better. So I don't think the company would miss me much beyond these two.
That's an evolutionary leap for a founder, right? Because typically when you start an organization, you drive a great deal of pride in how central you are to the organization, how your sleeves rolled up, you're involved in everything that's happening, and people are coming to you, and that gives you validation. To at some point, it becomes the exact mirror opposite of that, which is people are not coming to you, everything is working as is, you go away for 10 days and things are as good or perhaps even better when you come back, and that gives you pride, right?
Right.
When did that switch happen for you, and did you even consciously realize that switch happened between the two, right, where you're central to the organization, and the other thing where you've built an
Right.
organization which doesn't really require you, and which is great.
No, I agree. So I think it happened accidentally to me. It definitely didn't happen intentionally. I think I was so. I think 2016, 17 was the first time Avinash, who runs SaaS now, he had suggested that I should do a Vipassana, right? And I'd booked, but then I didn't go, saying, "Das din 10 days.
Yeah,
It's
I
like too
mean,
much." By the time I finally went, right, this was 2020 February, just before COVID, thankfully. I was just mentally in such a bad place. I had this thing playing at the back of my head saying, I was 35, midlife crisis probably, but saying the thought in my head constantly would be that I've messed Capillary up, right? That I think we were in a great place in 2012. In the last 5-6 years, I took a lot of brash decisions, lost two co-founders, raised a ton of money, blew it all up, did all kinds of random stuff. Random stuff as in random experiments, right? So I was just mentally in this place where I was totally like, uh, you could call it a burnout, but then a very close friend actually, we were meeting for our 35th birthday at Goa, and I said something to the tune of, I think life is going to be all downhill from here, like personally, professionally, etc. And this guy looked at me. I was like, "Look, what's wrong, right? So you've done well. You seem to be doing well. Like, why do you feel that way?" And then he had done a Vipassana some 2-3 years earlier, and this is someone I trust with my life almost, right? So he said, "Look, nothing doing. You have to figure 10 days and go." And so I went for the 10 days. And when I came back, I think my mind was 80% more freer than when I went in. Basically, because 80% of the slot was this negative loop of saying, "You've messed this up," right? You messed a good company up. You messed this up was, I think, the loop that was just playing in my head, right? So when I came back, I realized that in those 10-12 days, the thing ran well. And I also realized the importance of you needing to take time off yourself to actually, I think every year, when I look back now, I think most years in Capillary were about 6-7 big decisions you took. It's not about, as the CEO or the founder, I think it's typically 6-7 big decisions which determine 80% of the value add or 80% of the value destruction that you're going to do this year, right? So, and if you don't have that mind space to sit down and take those big calls, you will eventually crumble, right? So now actually we have this thing in Capillary where anyone in the company can take a 10-day Vipassana or a 10-day retreat over and above your 20-day or your PTO, right?
How many have you done since 2020?
I've done one in a year, and more
You're
than half
married
are
now. Do you have a
yeah,
kid?
yeah, two
How do you
kids.
manage to find the time? I mean, I understand finding time from the organization, but those 10 days could potentially be family vacation days. How has it been for you and a conversation with your wife on that?
But that's the piece, right? So I've basically said that, look, this 10 days is beyond the 20 days of PTO, right? I mean, you get 20 days from the company to take a vacation, so that's still there. I'm saying this 10 days is over and above it.
No, but I'm not
Right,
talking about
so-
the company. I'm talking about family.
Yeah, from the family side also, they know that this is the company giving me time more than, The second piece is, of course, that, look, I've always been this traveling sales guy in a sense, right? So I think the way we've structured a family around also is quality of time more than quantity of time. So like every month we do a long weekend out, right? So and Bangalore is a beautiful place for that. Like we do one trip a year with both sides' parents. And then we do one trip without the parents, right? So it's kind of, so you are taking in a year 12 vacations at least, right? So it's so I think yeah. So both my kids also know that quality is more important than quantity in terms of time.